Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. I hope your August has been off to a great start. Beginning our broadcast, and farmers have lots of questions this time of year, and what to do with their hay is one of them. Baleage and haylage are often used interchangeably, but there are differences, and one may be better for your operation than the other. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh has more on this story.
When it comes to harvesting forages, there are two ways producers can do it, either in baleage or haylage. Nebraska Extension educator Brad Schick explains what exactly these two options are and how they differ from each other.
Right, so they both start out as producing high-quality forage. They are usually mowed with a swather. Baleage then is baled with a baler. A haylage, however, is then chopped through a silage chopper, a forage chopper, and it's either packed into a bunker, a silo, or on the ground, driven over and packed that way. One of the differences, again, between the baleage and haylage is the particle size. So in a baleage, we have the full stem still, just like a dry hay, whereas that haylage, it's chopped, so it's very fine particles. They interweave better. There's less oxygen, which means a haylage is going to ensile a little faster. It has more available nutrients or sugars, moisture content. It's going to have a little bit lower pH than a baleage would.
Brad says there are variables during harvest that can make one option better than the other.
So they each have their challenges. Baleage probably does not store as well as haylage, but again, that's a management dependent. And making sure you get things packed tight with a haylage will determine that. And also making sure that if there's any holes in your plastic with a baleage, that really determines the quality of it, because spoilage, rodents may eat through the plastic. That's something that you really have to keep an eye on.
When it comes to equipment, different machines and attachments are needed to complete each task. However, if a producer is looking to start fresh, there is one method that costs less than the other.
So with a baleage, you don't have to have a feed wagon or anything like that. You can use a hay buster, hay processor, or you can roll it out, or you can just feed it in a bale feeder as well. With a haylage, you're going to have some sort of feed wagon or something of the sort, like you would with any typical corn silage.
Brad also says it's not too late to decide which method to use.
So this year, if you have an alfalfa or something like that, you probably still have 2 cuttings left if you're on a 4 cutting rotation. So there would be an opportunity to still do that. Make no mistake about it, it's a management technique. It's going to take some fine tuning, tweaking when you do that, but that would be an easy way to add some high quality forage to an operation.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Brad also says baleage is probably the cheaper option for those that don't have the equipment. In that case, he says you can just buy some plastic and rent a wrapper. We've also got more information about this on the Market Journal website. Next up, if you walk out to check on your calves and notice a calf that is lying around more than seems normal, has drooping ears, or is especially easy to catch, odds are that calf isn't feeling very well. And according to one veterinarian I spoke with, summer pneumonia may be the cause. Now, this is something that can be contagious from calf to calf, but isn't something you'd see spread from calf to cow. And usually, larger herds are more susceptible.
Generally, herds with more than 500 cows are at increased risk. And then also herds that do an estrus synchronization program are at higher risk. And we think that is just due to a higher number of what we call effective contacts, meaning an example or an analogy of an effective contact would be something like a person with a cold sneezing or coughing into their hand and then touching a doorknob, and then another person coming along behind them unaware and touching that same doorknob.
Dr. Clark tells me summer pneumonia is especially prevalent this season due to the extreme weather earlier this year. It weakened cows, and as a result, the colostrum for newborn calves was lower quality. And there are other stressors too.
Certainly any of the major stressors are going to come into play here: weather stress, heat stress, transport. If you have to haul cattle a long way to summer grass, then after they arrive, they're going to be at higher risk of this condition for probably a period of about 2 weeks. And then after that, things should kind of stabilize. Another risk factor that comes to mind is that if in a herd where they have fought scours already this year, those calves are going to be at higher risk for summer pneumonia as well. The scours being an indication that their immunity is reduced for some reason. And so they're going to be more susceptible to things like summer pneumonia.
As for treatment, you can usually get summer pneumonia under control if you hit it early. Preventative vaccines are key too, and Dr. Clark recommends consulting with your vet to get a plan in place. We're sticking with cattle as we head into this week's market segment. Last month's cattle inventory report showed that cattle numbers are flattening out. Also, with lower acres, feed costs are still a concern. And what can we expect in the markets as we edge closer to Labor Day, the last big beef holiday of the year? On Tuesday, I spoke with Mike Briggs over at Briggs Feed Yard in Seward. I started off by asking if this summer has thrown any curveballs his way.
The summer market has been pretty much what we've expected. The weather's been better than probably usual. We talked about that earlier. You had one little bad stretch in there, and the summer's been pretty easy to take, which, as far as I'm concerned, we deserve that after the winter and the spring that we had. But marketing's been kind of what we thought. We are in a really good situation, especially in eastern Nebraska. Fundamentally wise, we're very current. You can see that in the weights. The weights are below the last couple years. So we're doing a good job moving cattle through the system, which tells you that demand is good. And you always want that. So I think as a whole, we've done really well. And I think as we go forward here, we're going to be in pretty good shape.
And then there was the inventory report from last month, and that signaled that we may be topping out as far as expansion goes. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think very much so. That's been pretty easy to see if you looked at the cow kills and things like that. Plus, nobody's really accounted for the losses from the winter with the calf losses that we've had. So that's going to be interesting as we go forward. I think you're going to see your cattle on feeds ratchet down. I know they're already much lower than we thought they would be. Once again, we're putting less pounds on the market, so I think that's really helping us. I think the market as a whole is in pretty good shape now. We're ramping up right now into that time where we have pretty good demand going into Labor Day, which is your last big beef holiday of the year. Then we struggle and stumble a little bit after that, and I think we'll stumble a little bit after that this year. I just don't think it's going to get as bad as it has the last few years. Then when we get towards the fourth quarter, towards the end of the fourth quarter and into the first, you're going to see a pretty dramatic drop in your on-feed numbers and your cattle ready for market numbers. I think that really helps us as we go forward.
Of course, feed prices, a lot of folks saying that's an issue. You guys been feeling that too?
Yeah, you know, the corn thing got a little exciting there for a little bit, and as far as I'm concerned, this corn thing is real. Now, you sit here in southeast Nebraska and everything looks awesome, but I know in talking to customers from Illinois and talking to people around, this crop is not good. I think we're finally going to find that out on the August 12th crop report, and I'm afraid we're going to get a rude awakening. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the acres are going to be there. I don't think so, and we've got a long time for this crop's going to be done. You know, it's August now. Usually you're kind of start winding down, thinking about, oh, we're going to be cutting silage here in a few weeks. No, you're not. We're a good 30 days out from that, and you're 30 days from, and 45 to 60 days from corn harvest. So I think there's still a lot of things facing us as far as feed prices right now.
As for margins in the feedlot, what are we seeing?
Well, we're finally starting to get in the black. I've seen it in my performance. Now most of the cattle that lived through the entire winter, those cattle are harvested and gone. The performance was horrible. Those cattle lost money. Break-evens were way higher than projected. That was really tough. Now we're getting into the cattle that came in after the first of the year. They still lived through part of the winter, but they were on the tail end of it. Performance has started to increase dramatically, and therefore my cost of gains are better and our break-evens are better. So a guy can make a little money here depending on how you had him protected. But once again, I think after we get this Labor Day demand kind of satisfied, I'm afraid we might stumble a little bit, but we'll see.
So one positive, looks like range and pasture conditions have been awesome.
That's been really good, and that's going to have an effect on your on-feed numbers, because with high-priced grain, high-priced feed, people are going to leave those cattle out there absolutely as long as they can. So that's going to mix up your marketing numbers a little bit, which I still think are going to be bullish for us. It's going to get us away from this supply, so it's not just a constant slog of cattle. Get us away from this and get us into next year where things are going to be a little bit better.
So as far as supply, how do you think that's going to impact prices over the next few months?
Well, once again, I think we're going to run into a little bit of a supply issue after we get out of Labor Day, but I don't think it's going to last very long. I'd sure like to see something get taken care of with this trade situation, so maybe we could see some export demand to help take some of that extra product supply out of there. But hopefully we'll just continue along with our demand. I know every year that Christmas, that holiday demand for ribs keeps coming a little earlier, a little earlier, a little earlier. So September, October would be a good time for that demand to start pulling some of that supply away. But I think we're in good shape. I think if I was a restaurant owner, a restaurateur, I'd be looking to lock my stuff in for a period of time now, because I don't think beef's going to get a lot cheaper than it is right now, or maybe for the next 45 days.
And Mike, we'll end it like we always do. Do you have any risk management tips or marketing advice for the folks watching?
Well, I still think we're going to see a lot of volatility. And depending upon how much of an iron stomach you have, I still think you need to do something. I'm doing options now because I think there's upside in this market, where last spring I was fearing a downside deal, which we ended up having. So I'm trying to do options and leave my top side open here. I don't think you ever want to go without some type of risk management. The volatility, you can see it in the last 2 days. My gosh, there's just been huge ranges in the trading. And I think that's going to continue because you have so much volatility in the world. So I think a guy's got to protect himself as he goes forward.
Next week, we'll be joined by Daryl Peel, a livestock economist from Oklahoma State University. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. It's time for this week's trivia question. And did you see our story last week about Nebraska viticulture? Well, make sure and check it out if you missed it. That's our trivia question this week. Nebraska has how many acres of grapes? Is the answer 550 acres, 580 acres, 610 acres, or is it 635 acres? Make your guess, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. With the passage of LB 657 in the 2019 unicameral legislature, Nebraskans will be able to legally grow industrial hemp in the state. Still, questions remain regarding markets and seed supplies and what LB 657 allows growers to do. At recent forums hosted by Midwest Hemp Exchange in Nebraska, industry experts and interested growers gathered to discuss the path forward. In the August Nebraska Farmer, read about the potential for industrial hemp production, as well as requirements, best management practices, and equipment, including insight from those with growing experience. Now, I don't know about hemp, but Al Dutcher is here, and he has lots of experience with the weather. Al, what's the forecast look like for the week?
Well, Troy, we've had a pretty active week. If you're in western Nebraska, last week we talked about the potential for daily thunderstorm activity, particularly during the overnight hours. As systems moved around the periphery of the upper air ridge that has been dominating much of the southern and central plains and portions of the southern Rockies. The models were projecting more of that precipitation for eastern Nebraska, and reality was the models were off by about 50 to 100 miles depending on the day. And we see much more of that activity crossing the western two-thirds of the state, leaving much of eastern Nebraska high and dry. And unfortunately, the area that needed to receive the more significant moisture, that area just to the north of Omaha and south of Sioux City, and not quite over to Columbus, we've seen an expansion in the drought monitor for abnormally dry conditions. And within this area, particularly centered around the West Point area over toward the river, we're looking at deficits over the last 60 days that are exceeding 4 inches, so well under half of what we would normally expect to receive. Therefore, I would anticipate that there is some areas within this abnormally dry conditions that are experiencing moderate drought conditions due to late planting. Some of the soil moisture has probably been robbed over this last couple months with not much in the way of infiltration from precipitation events, creating deficit type situation. And so it's very important that this next 7-day period we do receive some respectable moisture in this area to continue to reduce the amount of destruction that's potentially going to occur to this crop lacking moisture. So as we look at today, what we notice is we have high pressures firmly situated over Texas. The ridge is sitting right at the southern half, the periphery of it at the southern half of Nebraska, a little wave moving through the region. Low pressure at the surface at the Texas Panhandle is going to be able to lift moisture toward the north. So we are seeing some thunderstorm activity expected today to develop in the Panhandle, and this will fill in as the cold front starts to push toward the south from the Plains region. And particularly as we get into tomorrow morning, you'll see the periphery of the ridge is laying, basically splitting Nebraska in half. We have low pressure in the Texas Panhandle. Low pressure is forecasted to develop over the northwestern part of the state. These will combine to create a widespread area of precipitation, and that will move across the state during the overnight hours. And on Monday, we see yet another wave that is going to progress toward the east with its surface low located over the Oklahoma Panhandle. That is going to continue to feed moisture into this system, and most of this will move into eastern Nebraska during the daylight and overnight hours. And finally, as we get into Tuesday morning, that trough will start to strengthen as it moves toward the east and dig a little bit deeper. High pressure is going to settle in behind this low pressure system that's exiting to our east. So the precipitation that we see is primarily going to be focused during the early morning hours, and then most of that will, by the noon hour, move toward our east. And then we start to see the high pressure expanding once again and bringing warmer temperatures back to the state. We see our low pressure system is potentially developing in northeastern Colorado. This is probably going to act on monsoon moisture, so if we see any convection, it's probably going to be in the Panhandle, but most of it should remain to our north. On Thursday, we see an expansion of this high pressure system much further toward the east. Everybody should be well into the 90s, unless we in northeast Nebraska, upper 80s. Low pressure once again developing in the southwestern portion of Kansas may induce a few scattered thunderstorms, but organized precipitation just doesn't look in the cards. And we see that that ridge continues to expand even further toward the east on Friday, so hot conditions will continue. Low pressure once again in the southwestern part of Kansas may induce a few scattered thunderstorms across the state. Looks like the best area in eastern Nebraska according to the models, but overall a fairly dry pattern as we go into this next weekend. 8 to 14-day forecast from next Thursday to the following Tuesday indicates that this high pressure ridge will dominate much of the central southern plains and will expand toward the east with the warmth, and in terms of precipitation, well below normal precipitation. So we need to see this precipitation over this next 7-day period, particularly in eastern Nebraska. Overall, Troy, it looks like we do have opportunities for precipitation. We're going to be warm this weekend. We're going to cool down slightly into the middle of next week, and then we once again start to warm up dramatically as we get into late next week.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, Nebraska has how many acres of grapes that are used for the state's burgeoning wine industry? The answer is C, 610 acres. Next up, with all the challenges crop producers have faced this year, more will inevitably come, namely crop disease. And with the amount of moisture we've seen this year, something producers and agronomists might want to consider is the potential for disease in fields. And that's what Market Journal's Bill Dodd has his eye on this week. Bill, take it away.
Thanks, Troy. Now, there are many diseases that are favored by the wet and soggy conditions we've seen this year, and on top of that, heat and humidity can also play the role of a catalyst in many crop diseases, and we've definitely seen plenty of both of those in the state this year as well. For example, southern rust has been confirmed in several states to the south and east of the Cornhusker State, and while the disease is at relatively low levels so far, having only been found in some southern counties in Nebraska, conditions for its onset have been prevalent, and experts are suggesting that producers in the southern portion of Nebraska should be especially mindful and thoroughly monitoring their fields. While southern rust may not always need treatment, scouting fields and remaining vigilant are critical this time of year. It may take some time sitting in complementary weather conditions for the disease to spread and have a meaningful impact on your crop. However, early detection can save you headaches in the long run. Furthermore, as UNL Extension plant pathologist Tamra Jackson-Ziems points out, the misdiagnosis of southern rust can be an easy mistake to make.
This is really difficult this year. There is so much more common rust than what we've had in the past because of the cool, wet conditions we've had leading up until now. The problem is telling southern rust apart from common rust. Southern rust is the one that we're much more concerned about because most of our hybrids are susceptible to that. Not all of them, though. And so what we would recommend is people look for rusty spores that are on the surface of the leaf, mainly on the top surface, and if they are orange to tan in color and small, that could be southern rust. In contrast, common rust is more of a cinnamon brown or brick red, and it can produce spores on both the top and the bottom surface. Keep in mind we have a lot of resources to help, pictures and descriptions, but also we have the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic that can give you a diagnosis very quickly on what that is, and that could help you make a spray decision.
While most hybrids are susceptible to southern rust, it is important for producers to familiarize themselves with hybrid types and anticipate reaction to the disease by reviewing seed company ratings. Furthermore, while foliar fungicides can contain the disease, most fungicides will protect the leaves for future infections for up to 28 days, which makes the application time very critical. Applying fungicide before the disease is fully developed may lead to loss of the product's efficiency, and on the other hand, treating too early could force you to reapply later if spreading worsens. Now, as we've seen a wide range of planting dates throughout Nebraska this year, we're starting to see various stages of corn development. Later planted fields that are still in early maturity have the highest potential for yield loss if the disease develops. Now, it can take several days or weeks to get traction in a field once identified in an area. Now, while treatment may not be necessary at first, it may become necessary later, making scouting your fields very critical in containing this particular disease. Now, another disease that we're seeing more of this year due to the amount of moisture we've had is Physoderma brown spot. This is yet another disease that could be mistaken for southern rust as well as other crop diseases. Now, telltale signs of this particular disease include small lesions that are round or oblong with yellowish or brown color. Additionally, similar colorations may develop on leaves, stalks, and husks, while young lesions may resemble those caused by southern rust or other rust diseases. Closer inspection would be prudent and advisable.
So it's very alarming when you first see it, and many people might mistake it for southern rust, but keep in mind rust spores will rub off on your fingers. Physoderma will not, and often those lesions are in bands across the leaf, and where they cross the midrib, they're dark black or dark purple in color, and they can even be down on the leaf sheath or the stalk, and if you get a lot of it on the stalk, they can infect around a node and make it brittle, so wind or when you push on them might make them break off.
This particular disease is really considered of mild importance in the Midwest. On that note, many major seed companies tend not to give rise to resistance in their hybrids in this particular region. For the time being, some fungicides are labeled for Physoderma brown spot. While the disease is rarely much of a threat to yield totals and normally doesn't require treatment, it should be noted that accurate identification is important in avoiding unnecessary treatment due to misdiagnosis. Now lastly, one disease that we want to mention that isn't particularly giving Nebraska any trouble at the moment, though, is tar spot. Many producers have taken notice of the damage that it's caused in recent years in some of our neighboring states. While there are no confirmed cases of the disease in Nebraska as of now, extension educators point out the importance of staying ahead of the curve and being proactive in scouting fields for this particular disease. As of now, it's believed the pathogen for this particular disease is spread via wind and rainwater. As with many corn-related diseases, tar spot does have some doppelgangers, namely common and southern rust. At the end of the growing season, both fungi switch from producing orange-red spores to black. Now, it's important to keep in mind that rust spores come through the epidermis and the spores can be easily scraped away with a fingernail.
We want to make sure people understand we do not have tar spot yet in Nebraska, but we want people to watch for it. Many people have heard about this already in social media and some of our agricultural trade magazines, where many of our neighbors to the east have been talking about this disease, and it's caused quite a bit of damage in the last couple of years. Tar spot looks exactly like what you might imagine. It looks like small black dots of tar or black paint that have been splattered on the leaf. And so if you see something like that, make sure that it doesn't rub off, because it could be an insect or bird droppings. That's very common too. And if it doesn't rub off and it's raised, please send a sample to the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic so we can get a look at it, or give us a call so that we can make sure that it's not tar spot.
As always, producers and agronomists are encouraged to collect and submit samples, and any samples collected can be sent to the UNL Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic for assistance in identifying these and any other diseases or pests. If you're unsure of the diagnosis, you can find more information on how to submit samples at the PPDC site at cropwatch.unl.edu/plant-disease/UNL-diagnostic-clinic-Lincoln. And Troy, that's what I got my eye on this week. We'll send it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. For our final story this week, Nebraska researchers are once again out in the fields looking for signs of soybean gall midge infestation. It's still a relatively new pest, but it's quickly caught the attention of producers. Cropping System Specialist Dr. Justin McMechan was out scouting for it and captured this video.
This is Justin McMechan here with the University of Nebraska, and I just wanted to do a quick note on scouting for soybean gall midge late in the season. And so in front of me here, you'd never suspect a field like this had any issues with soybean gall midge. Some of the photos we've been showing are a series of dead or dying plants near the edge of the field that you'd think on a drive-by would be pretty apparent. But you know, if you take a closer look, and I'll just show this canopy for example, and take a step in and stick near the field edge here and just open up this canopy just a little bit to look down inside, you'll see that there are a number of plants here that are actually infested with soybean gall midge, and they break off pretty easily. We've had some of these dead and dying plants that died earlier in the season. You know, those are hiding amongst this green canopy. Others are starting to wilt and die, like these. And you can see here as we go down this row, we've got more wilting, dead and dying plants, and they're pretty brittle. And just peeling back just a little bit of that tissue will help growers sort this out from other things that they might be finding in their field. I already peeled one open just as an example here that I'll show you. And you can see we've got a number of larvae on the top part of this plant. And you can see most of those are third instar larger larvae that are likely to fall off and pupate pretty soon, and then we've got some first and second instars in there as well. So just another note on a perfectly healthy field like this, or that you look and see it looks perfectly healthy, well worth it to get out and scout those fields and take a look and make sure you have gall midge or not.
Thanks to Justin for that walkthrough. Bill Dodd will sit down with him next week to get even more information on this pest and more things you can do. Also next week, we'll look at some things that impact corn silage quality and hear about the upcoming crop management diagnostic clinics. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.